Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our reading by Leslie Leyland Fields. I'm Paul Willis from the English department, and I should tell you that our reading is sponsored not only by the English department, but by our Gender Studies program, by the Gady Institute for the Liberal Arts, by Poets and Writers Incorporated. I'm the poet, Leslie is the writer. We're bipartisan. I imagine we're also sponsored by the American Tea Party, by Occupy Wall Street, Occupy WASC, and Occupy Hieronymus. That's all of us. Leslie will read for, I think, a little under an hour, and then she's consented to answer a few questions if you have some for her. When we get to the Q&A, and if you need to be somewhere else, we'll give you a moment to slip out if need be. I met Leslie 8 years ago this fall at a conference in Seattle, and I discovered she was a lover of Jesus and a lover of wild places and a lover of writing, and it seemed we had a few things in common, except I get seasick and she does not. I read her memoir after that, Surviving the Island of Grace, Life on the Wild Edge of America, and learned about her hardworking childhood in New Hampshire, her college years in Ohio, where she met her husband, Duncan, and her return with Duncan to his home state of Alaska, to Kodiak Island, where she exhausted herself in learning the trade of commercial salmon fishing, and where she and Duncan have raised and are still raising 6 children. Her oldest daughter recently graduated from Wheaton, and her oldest son, Noah, is a junior here at Westmont. Her next oldest son, Isaac, has just begun at Azusa Pacific, and Leslie's niece, Rochelle, is also a student here. She's a senior. Leslie has edited several books about the lives of Alaska fishermen and fisherwomen, the most recent of which is Hooked, which would make her Captain Hooked, I think. She's written a book called Surprised Child about dealing with unplanned pregnancies. Most recently, she has edited an anthology of essays called The Spirit of Food, 34 writers on feasting and fasting toward God. Has some wonderful people in here like Wendell Berry. A number of these books will be available for sale and signing just outside the door after her reading, and Serena, put up your hand, Serena will be the saleswoman. You can read Leslie's work in her columns and cover stories in Christianity Today. You can also read her occasional pieces in the Atlantic Monthly or Orion or Image. In other words, she has made her mark in both Christian and mainstream publishing, something I think all writers of faith would do well to emulate. So she's here to read to us tonight. Please welcome Leslie Leyland Fields.
I feel really embarrassed to say, Paul, I couldn't remember when we first met. I know it's been, we keep meeting because we go to the same conferences, and it's been great that we've been able to stay in touch all these years, but I'm glad you remembered the first time we met. First, just a very sincere thanks to both Paul and Sherry for bringing me here. It's always just a great delight to be here at Westmont, and it's also really delightful to be here without smoke and fire, because that was the last time I was here. So I'm enjoying this trip very much. I have a new word for all of you today. I learned a new word today, and I want to see if anyone else knows this word. The word is hominology, Hominology. Anybody know that word? Hominology. Okay, we know it's a study of, okay, it's the study of tall, upright, hairy creatures, like the Yeti, the abominable snowman Sasquatch. It's a real word, and it's a real, well, some people wouldn't say it's a real science, but I just read in the Wall Street Journal today on the front page that the Russian government is investing money in this, in hominology and hominologists, because they believe that they have actually seen and discovered the Yeti. So you can go online and check that out. Actually, you don't have to. I brought the article with me. I read that this morning, and I didn't have anyone to share it with, so you guys got it. You know, sometimes something's so good, like you just can't contain it. I've written a lot from my life in Alaska, and my first 4 books are placed in Alaska, and my latest book. And it's true that when we live in a place for a long time, that place can define you. And place can confine you as well, especially when you live on an island and then an island off of an island and you're not free to come and go as you wish. Jose Ortega y Gasset has a famous quote about this. "Tell me the landscape in which you live, and I will tell you who you are." It just sounds beautiful, doesn't it? It sounds really profound, but I'm not sure how true that is anymore. I'm not sure how much we allow landscape to define us. I think all of us are in such a mad rush to escape our geographical boundaries with technology and our iPhones and our computers. But every landscape does limit us, or it should. And Wendell Berry talks about that a lot, and it's so crucial, I think, for us as Americans, especially to recognize the limits of nature and even our creaturely limits. But I have to be honest with you. As a writer, I don't want to be confined. As a writer, I don't want to be confined by geography or by subject. And thank you so much, Paul, for not introducing me as an Alaskan writer, which happens a lot. And I just bristle a little bit at that because I'm a writer from Alaska, but I don't necessarily want to be an Alaskan writer. I want to be a writer. I want to be a writer. Just a writer. I don't want to be confined, by any sort of modifier ahead of my word, the word writer, because there's so many other places that I want and need to go. So I'm going to read 2 essays tonight, and the first one is about, I'm going to read from The Spirit of Food. And I hadn't quite decided on the second essay to read for tonight until after chapel. And Ben must have mentioned something about the book, The Spirit of Food, because I had probably 5 or 6 people come up to me after and say, oh, what about that food book? What's that about? So I thought, okay, this is a food audience. It's definitely a food audience. And then after, and I'm going to read from the introduction to The Spirit of Food. And then after that, I am going to take you to Alaska. We're going to go into a skiff, and we're going to do a little fishing together. And the introduction to The Spirit of Food, actually, it does start with salmon. And I just realized that everything I'm going to read tonight, plus my chapel message, has like salmon in it. That wasn't planned. That wasn't conscious, which worries me. You know that saying, like, oh yeah, he's a one-trick pony. It's like, oh yeah, she's a one-trick fish or something. I don't know. So while I'm reading about food, I just brought some food because I thought, it would make me feel so much more comfortable if you guys were like eating while I'm reading about food. So would you just pass these around and get comfortable, but try not to drop any crumbs on the floor. The season's first salmon hang headless in my daughter's hands, one fish in each, as she walks them up the hill to the house. From the front steps, I can see their heft and length, the shine of their silvered scales, their shimmering backs. I am anxious to hold them myself. It is the first week of the commercial salmon fishery, a profession my children and husband have worked in nearly since birth. For me, it's been 33 seasons here on this remote Alaskan island. I grab their tails from my daughter on the porch, slide their arm-length bodies onto the counter-sized cutting board. With one hand firm on the skin-thin armor, I begin to stake out the fish with the other. The first cut almost makes me gasp, as though I have cut my own finger. The flesh is deep carmine, so bright. Is this my own blood? I know this color, can see it, even taste it in the sleep of memory. How many salmon have I gutted and cleaned and portioned on the shore of my island, on this very cutting board, these 33 years? I keep slicing, the dissection so enlivening my senses, I do not measure or make any attempt at uniformity. How shall I cook it, this fish we have been waiting for all winter? Shall I grill it with melted butter, minced garlic, and white wine, my favorite flavors? No. For the first fish, something new, something untried and spontaneous, fitting this exact moment and these precise two fish. I begin with melted butter and minced garlic, then riffle through my cupboard, pulling down brown sugar, a spicy pepper blend, parsley, formulating as my hands consider each potential spice, a slow idea of what I would aim for. Yes, this time a sweet and spicy crust. Even now, I couldn't say how many minutes to grill the fish. I don't follow a clock when grilling. I'm not interested in creating a numerical formula for the safe and simplified replication of my attempts at perfection. I stand and watch, testing the juices, whisking each piece off when the flesh begins to turn translucent, each piece on its own schedule. I carry the platter of steaks to the kitchen. The mood at the table today is jubilant. Everyone has just come in from a morning on the ocean, picking salmon from the nets. My 4 older children, who run their own boats, report a good catch. The northeast storm forecast for this morning had mostly passed. Everyone is still fresh in the season before the long weeks of work drain their strength and anticipation. I set the salmon on the table, the steaks assembled in a glass dish. Around it, I arrange bowls of steamed broccoli, rice pilaf, fresh fruit salad, ciabatta that I finished making this morning. Meals later in the summer will include fresh halibut and cod from our front yard waters, deer from our own mountainside, salmon berries from the meadow, leaf lettuce from our garden. While the food steams on the table, 8 faces look at me expectantly, waiting for the signal for prayer. I'm going to do something a little different today, I say, hesitant, knowing that multiple appetites are rumbling under the table and knowing how puny the spirit can feel before such need. This is the first salmon of the season. You all know the tradition that fishermen kiss the first fish. Anyone do that today? My oldest son rolls his eyes, wanting only to eat. I hurry on. I'm going to read something before we eat. I pull my Bible onto the table, and before anyone can resist, I begin. This is from the book of Job. But ask the animals, and they will teach you, or the birds of the air, and they will tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, or let the fish of the sea inform you. Which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature, and the breath of all mankind. Everyone listens, watching the food. Then I pray aloud for all of us that this season we will not forget. I want to say far more, to deliver a sermon, but I stop, knowing the wafers of fish on our tongues will deliver its own message. We eat. Faces are too close to the plates, forks are shoveling, heads lift with butter smeared on cheeks and crumbs lodged in beards. Everyone talks with his mouth full. We tease each other. Someone will have to yell to get the salad. At least 1 cup of iced tea will be spilled, and we'll run out of bread. These are our glorious, blessed feasts. Like many in our culture today, I am fascinated by food. The whorl of purple cabbage as I slice, each head a distinct pattern as unique as any fingerprint. The crust that forms on a loaf of whole wheat sourdough, the elasticity of a skein of hand-rolled pasta hanging in my hands before the drop into a boiling pot. Not just the handling and preparation of food, but its history, its science, the art of arranging its astonishing colors and textures. Perhaps I would love food no matter my own life story, but I love it all the more for having discovered it on my own as an adult. While growing up, food was a grim necessity that I mostly avoided. Breakfast for my entire childhood was leftover 12-grain cereal, the same pot of cereal heated over and over each day until it was gone. Lunch was a single sandwich in a bag, always the same. For supper, we ate canned mackerel mixed with mayonnaise, lettuce, and raisins, or boiled soybeans, or chicken necks and rice. There was little or no food between meals. We did not cook from recipes. No matter the recipe, we didn't have the ingredients. Cooking was more a matter of assembling whatever we had and heating it if desired. But we did grow massive gardens, and our winter paucity was eased by an overflow of vegetables that assured at least a fresh salad every summer night. When I left home at 17 for college, I did not know how to eat. The whole world became one giant cafeteria, filled with new dishes and foods, real spaghetti sauce. I saw that food could be beautiful and sensual and spiritual. I wanted to eat everything and nearly did, trying to fill that long, deep hunger. Overeating was followed by starvation, beginning years of struggle to find a way to approach food without fear, lust, or guilt. I have been healthy for a long time now, and I have found that the food that once threatened me contained its own seeds of healing. I feed myself and many people every day, and I labor joyfully and passionately to feed them well with homemade jellies, grass-fed beef, and dear, whole-grain, handmade breads. I am hardly alone in my various food pursuits. We've become a nation of foodies, whether the food is junk and fast or organic and slow, whether boutique fare or diner fare, comfort food or haute cuisine, whether we're gaining weight or losing it. Eating out is a national pastime. Cooking in and hosting supper clubs and dinner parties is popular entertainment. Culinary schools are full. And food isn't just for eating anymore. We are watching more cooking shows than ever. At least one network is devoted entirely to food. Even radio shows bring us tales from the kitchen. A widening array of books on food stacks the bestseller lists and the shelves of local bookstores, cookbooks, food memoirs, exposés, histories, biographies. This national attention to all things food-related is needed and overdue. Perhaps we are revolting against the age of information that harnesses us to desks and computers for most of the day, our bodies forgotten in this bodiless realm. Many writers, growers, nutritionists, and theologians are calling us back from a kind of forgetfulness and inattention to our physicality, our appetites, and our food, a neglect that quite literally threatens our health. We eat far too many meals one-handed, the other on a steering wheel. So many of us eat too much of the wrong foods too fast. Family dinners are threatened by our all-consuming schedules. We all know the consequences: rising rates of obesity and diabetes, the pandemic backlash of eating disorders, the projected costs to our national health, the growing toxicity of our soil and food supply. In the midst of plenty, we have forgotten how to eat, it seems. Our kids have grown up in a world where ketchup and French fries are counted as vegetables, where soda is the beverage of choice, and where meat and a gooey dessert is expected at every meal. Okay, I did pass around those cookies. Right. There's fruit afterwards. Okay. I see school children eating diced hot dogs and slurping salted fried noodles from styrofoam cups for lunch every day. Meal bars are increasingly replacing plates of steaming dinners and hot breakfasts. We are in the midst of a national eating disorder, pronounces the New Yorker magazine. There's a lot at stake beside our personal health, though that is serious enough. Increasingly, we are understanding the wider costs of our food choices, the impact on our God-created environment as we have shifted from family farms and ranches to agribusinesses, where efficiency overrules integrity and environmental stewardship. Genetically modified foods raise a number of biological and ethical questions. The inhumane treatment of animals that provide us with meat, dairy, and eggs cause us to question our compassion and responsibility. And with frequent breakouts of foodborne illnesses, we wonder about the safety of our food supply. If we follow the news, the best-selling books, the latest diet trend, the debates and exposés of our national food practices and production, we can feel overwhelmed, guilty. The table we stand before is no longer a banquet table offering sustenance. It's a minefield threatening our own destruction or the destruction of the planet. With our plate in hand, our stomachs rumbling, and our well-informed minds on alert, we survey the offerings as we walk the length of the table. That appetizer is full of trans fat. That plate of fruit is bathed in pesticides. That salad exploits migrant workers. That noodle casserole is nutritionally bankrupt. That stroganoff comes from abused animals. We are paralyzed. What do we choose? How do we eat? How do we respond as people of faith? And if we make all the right choices, will good food, rightly procured and produced, then save us? Even as I ask these questions, I know something is missing. Something our grandmothers and mothers knew at their church potlucks as they carried to the communal tables Velveeta broccoli casseroles and Jell-O salads greener than any fruit dared to grow. In our zeal for purity and right living, we may have forgotten something other generations and cultures knew. That food is more than politics. Food is more than economics. Food is more than culture, entertainment, nutrition, even justice. As important as each of these is, none of them singly identifies or describes all that food is and does and is meant to be. Food is nothing less than sacrament. All food is given by God and is given as a means to sustain not just our bodies, but also our minds and our spirits. In all of its aspects, growth, harvest, preparation, and presentation, food is given as a primary means of drawing us into right relationship toward God, toward His creation, and His people. Even its intentional absence through fasting pulls us toward a deeper dependence on God and one another. As I turn to the scriptures now, I am amazed at the centrality of food in its pages. God's redemption story opens in a garden, where some of God's first words to the first man and woman were words about eating. Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed and every tree. To you it shall be for food. The whole world is presented to them as their table. Every bite of food given by God Himself is to make God known to man, to make man's life communion with God. Alexander Schmemann writes in For the Life of the World. But the world fell into sin soon after those loving provisions, and our dependence on food, air, and water became a tightly enclosed circle, where these elements became an end in themselves, the source of both life and fulfillment. Into the midst of this lifeless cycle, Jesus came. He came as living water, as the bread of life. And he spent much of his time feeding the hungry, both truth and loaves of barley bread. He taught us to pray for our daily bread. He ate and drank so freely with friends and sinners he was accused of gluttony and drunkenness. He fasted as well, demonstrating his physical and spiritual dependence upon his heavenly Father. He chose to spend his last hours on earth at a dinner with his disciples, where he chose homely bread and local wine to mark his death and ongoing life within us. When he returned after death, he proved his physical presence among his friends by sharing a meal with them. And while we sup on the bread and wine of the Eucharist, we wait hungrily for the marriage supper of the Lamb, when we will drink and feast to the nowness of the kingdom of God, its presence made real and present to us through its wondrous food. In that feast, and after that feast, we will do far more than simply sit at a banquet table, eating food God has made holy. Zechariah, my new favorite minor prophet who surely loved food, tells us that at the end of time, when heaven comes down to earth, a throng will gather on a pilgrimage to the New Jerusalem to worship God and celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, an 8-day festival of eating and worship. Zechariah ends his entire book with this image of heaven. On that day, holy to the Lord will be inscribed on the bells of the horses. And the cooking pots in the Lord's house will be like the sacred bowls in front of the altar. Every pot in Jerusalem and Judah will be holy to the Lord Almighty, and all who come to sacrifice will take some of the pots and cook in them. Every pot will be holy to the Lord, mine, yours. And every soup and vegetable and grain and fish and casserole and souffle and crepe prepared within them will be holy to all who partake, and holy to the God to whom it all belongs. Perhaps we're not to wait for that day. Perhaps we are to begin now, growing, harvesting, cooking from pots made holy by our work, our love, our worship. I don't pretend to understand or even to practice all of this now. I am only beginning to implement ways to better attend to the spirit of food in my life. But I have found lots of help. I have gathered around myself a company of adventurous and inspiring writers and cooks who have opened their gardens, their kitchens, and their tables. With theology as enriching as their food, they illuminate the many ways that food has drawn them toward God, toward his creation, toward his church, and toward their neighbors. In a time of great interest and equal confusion over the place of food in our lives, this collection will delight the senses, feed the spirit, enlarge our understanding, and deepen our ability to eat and drink to the glory of God. Take, eat, and be blessed. Are you hungry? Doesn't that just make you want to run home and cook something? Okay, thank you all for listening. It's not like a traditional essay. I mean, it's a little bit like a lecture, so I'm sorry for that. This next piece will be much more of an essay, but it will be a different kind of essay. The essay that I'm going to read next is from my new book that Paul introduced, Hooked. And it's an essay that's written in two voices. And I need to call my daughter forward. Shawnee is the other voice. She is my daughter, Naphtali. So the two parts in this are, I didn't, last time I did this, I didn't explain that the other person reading was not reading my words. They were actually reading my daughter's words. So my daughter has written, what Shawnee is reading is what my daughter has written. And my daughter and I have fished together, not a lot, but some over the years. Her very first fishing experiences were when she was a baby, really. We'd take her out in the skiff and dress her up in her little life. You've seen little bitty life jackets they make for babies, and so the babies, they're like this, because they look like a little penguin. And we would set her in a aluminum laundry tub and set her in the bow of the skiff while my husband and I picked. And so I think the essay will be pretty self-explanatory. It takes place out at Harvester Island where we live and fish. And no, would you like to give a geography lesson? No, okay. Okay. Do you guys want a geography lesson, like where is this place? Okay, all right. So the Alaska, you all know what Alaska looks like. I always describe it as like a profile of an old man, right? So sideways, forehead, nose, big fat chin, and then a beard, the Aleutian chain. Okay, so Kodiak Island is under his beard. So it's in the Gulf of Alaska, and it's a big island. It's actually the second largest island in the United States. Anybody know the largest island? Where? Yeah. It's a big island in Hawaii, and which is really like, what? That's the biggest island in the United States. Because when you look on the map, Hawaii looks like this big, and it's just because it's all, it's in the middle of a vast ocean. So Kodiak is a large island. Most of it is a federal bear refuge for the Kodiak bear. There are like 4,000 bear that live there. It's we say the largest density, the largest density of bears in the world is there in Kodiak Island, which doesn't have anything to do with this essay. So never mind. Okay, geography. Okay, so that's where Kodiak Island is. And in the wintertime, we live in the town of Kodiak on the east side, and then we, in the summer, we go out to our fish camp island, which is across on the other side of Kodiak. It's on the edge of a body of water called the Shelikof Strait. And it's a very cool place. There are live volcanoes that we can see down the peninsula. It tends to be a very stormy body of water. We have a lot of nets, and I think everything else is going to be self-explanatory. Okay, one other thing I want to say. This essay really was an experiment, and the whole thing is an experiment, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And the essay is an experiment, and our deal was that she's boss in the skiff, and I'm boss of the page. So that was so we sort of evened things out. All right. One skiff, two women, a constant harvest. It's a slow night on the water. I'm thankful. But it's a jellyfish night, or rather a jellyfish week. The ocean is thick with them, like mucus, these Aurelia aurita, moon jellyfish, the clear kind that look like ocean water plus Knox gelatin, with a little hyphenated cross as its entrails. It doesn't stop the work. Naphtali, 21, motors the skiff forward along the net as a steady stream of jellies slop through the bow roller into the skiff. The floor of the skiff is now just a mass of congealed water, and little broken crosses I have to stand on and in. I don't mind these. They feel somewhat antiseptic and even holy, with a Holy Ghost body. But other jellyfish come with them, these giant glops of oranges, pinks, rusts, as large as sinks, even bathtubs at times, their stinging strings like snot trailing behind. They're bagged in the net, and as we move forward, they'll travel the length of the 26-foot skiff. We lift our hands as they pass, narrow our eyes to protect our faces and skin from errant splashes of acid, until each one disappears off the stern with a slurp. Some leave their entrails at my feet. Every minute or so, I release the spring in my neck and look around. We're on the backside of our island, Harvester Island, a 400-acre teardrop that rises up to a single peak at 900 feet. Ours sounds proprietary, but we are, in fact, the only inhabitants of the island. We pick berries and wild flowers from its grasses, but our real catch is here in these waters. We're on the Shelikof Strait, a 40 by 300 mile length of water, fenced by mountain ranges on both sides, Kodiak Island on the one side, the Alaska Peninsula Range on the other, as toothed and lofty as any mountains I've seen in the world. They are one of the few fixtures in this world that remains in place. The water is always moving, carrying us the 10 miles from one net to the other, one island to another, delivering the salmon we depend on to our nets. But the ocean currents are generous and indiscriminate, delivering far more than fish. Are you picking the kelp? I ask, my voice an attempt at neutral. My views on the futility of kelp picking are known. I'll haul out the bull kelp, the massive heads and 20-foot-long tubal bodies that throng and choke the net. I'll untangle the twigs and branches that get forked in the mesh along with the kelp. I'll extract the sculpins knotted at the bottom of the lead line. But the grass and finger kelp and rockweed, when the tide turns, the current will pull most of it out. Yes, we're picking everything. There's not many fish, so at least we can keep the net clean, she says, snapping her large green eyes at me. It's her father's fault she's so precise. When I fished with him in the early days, no matter the state of exhaustion, the darkness, or how many thousands of fish had been picked already that day, every finger of kelp had to be extracted. I worked in dumb silence beside him, my protests abandoned. She's throwing the grasses and kelp in the skiff, behind her and beside her, where it joins the jellyfish on the bottom. The tide's already begun to turn, I say with an attempt to sound casual. Are you sure we have to keep the kelp? If we throw it in front of us, the current will take it away. It's not going anywhere for another hour at least. I don't want to have to pick it out of the nets again. I know the rules. Whoever's running the outboard is the skipper. Never mind that she is my daughter, 30 years younger. But whatever comes into the skiff has to come out, and it's my job to get it out. Already I'm ankle deep. Soon we'll have a load of everything from the ocean but fish. I squat just inches from the slop and begin bailing it over slowly so it doesn't splash into my eyes. It's our doing. We set our nets and tend them as though we've picketed a backyard plot. But this is Alaska, and our plot covers 10 miles of open, stormy ocean. Why do we think we can weed and tend the ocean?
I get frustrated when I fish with my mother. Today, as the jellyfish slide over the roller and plop down onto the floor, in a jello-like pile of clear pink, orange, and red goop, she reacts like a girl, scrunching her nose in disgust and turning her face away from the invading army. In the skiff and in life, I've learned to play opposites. Since she is cringing, I stoically speed up, whipping forward through the net, empty but for these glooping aliens. When we finish, she pulls a pole out of the bow to release the net back into the water. I reverse the motor and we ease away, the tangled mesh, corkline, and leads all sliding over the bow and into the ocean to sink once more into an invisible underwater wall. Mom looks back at me with a grimace and gestures to the ankle-deep soup of jellies. "I guess it's jelly week, huh?" she says. "More like jelly month," I respond, impatient to continue on. She looks at our fish, maybe 5 or 6 for our efforts, and makes another veteran comment. This is so pathetic. "Yep," I reply. She looks at me for a second as if she had something to add, but seeing my face steeled into the mask I wear for serious driving, she stops herself. She looks around the plastic totes for the baler and starts scooping up big pieces of mangled jellyfish and dumping them over the side. She does it half-heartedly, and we get to the next net before the skiff is close to clean. She gets dizzy when she bails, I think to myself, and try to muster a better attitude. But the sun is shining today, and the jellyfish smell like a sickly sweet medicine gone rotten. If she doesn't keep the skiff clean, it's going to stink this afternoon.
The tide is 21 feet today, which means the lines and nets in the water are all as taut as wires. "Sway's coming up," Naphtali shouts at me over the sound of the outboard. I wasn't watching, though that's my job as bowman. I'm not as attentive as I should be in the skiff. Sometimes I'm sorting through decades of summer and work here. Every fish that noses over the bow and into the skiff comes laden with history, generations of fish before it. In my early years out here, in the late 70s, I worked in the skiff with Duncan, my husband, her father, until the year I said no more. Naphtali will never really know all I've done and all that happened in the skiff before she was born. I don't intend this constant harvest. It's a heavy load sometimes. I want new memories, and I want to better remember the good that has happened on these waters as well. The sway buoy rises before me now. I clamber up to the bow shelf as best I can in my full rain gear and leaden boots. I lean over into the water to lift the sway buoy and the line of the net over the bow. I seize it, but the line is so taut it can snap my arm in two. I cannot budge it. But we can't finish this net unless I lift the line over the bow. I hang there, one arm anchored to the immovable line, the other holding the rest of me from going overboard. I keep trying, using 2 hands now, though I risk slipping on the wet aluminum or falling overboard entirely. I do not feel powerless. I am strong, I think. I have built houses, run long miles, hiked mountains all over the world. But I am not young. I cannot bulldog my way through even this first hard task. This is my idea. We're planning on fishing together an entire season next year, just Naphtali and I in the skiff. It will be my last season in the skiff, a final hurrah. Who better to spend it with than my only daughter? This is our trial run right now in the last week of this season, before Naphtali returns to college, before I return to Kodiak. The thought of returning to the skiff next year excites me and scares me. I don't know if I can do it for so many reasons. Right now, this unliftable line is one of them. "Can't get it," I call back, finally signaling my retreat. I don't look back at her. "Let it down," she announces flatly. I know she's disappointed in me. I pull the pole out of the bow, let the net snake back into the water, and we reverse out of the net. We'll pick it up again in another place, returning to this spot from the other direction. She's not crazy about the plan for next year. She didn't even want me to come out with her tonight. What about a whole season?
She can't get the sway over the roller. I can see her straining in the bow, using all her weight as leverage against the tight line. But I can't keep the sternness from my face. Uncle Wallace and his crew are on this net too. Putting it down and starting again is an admission of weakness, acknowledging some difference between this feminine crew and the normal male configuration. And unlike my mother, I can't do that yet. I go up to the bow to try and help her, but she was right. The line is too tight to lift. As I back away so we can reapproach the net, she smiles in triumph, as if to say, "See, that wasn't so hard." What she hasn't thought about is what's coming next, a hard landing on a net that we now have to pull in by hand without the motor's help. We've avoided one problem, but pulling up to the leads in this new approach is going to be worse. She comes to the stern after we land so we can get the leads up to the picking pole. Both of us stretch out splayed, claw-like fingers and grab the mesh. We arch our spines and lean backwards, pulling with the strength where we have it, in our butt and thighs. We breathe and pull in tandem, watching the heavy weighted leads slowly emerge from the water and inch towards us. When they are within arm shot, I reach for them, hugging them to my chest and leaning my torso back into the skiff. Mom has a pole ready and we snap it into place. After 5 minutes of pulling, we can now proceed to the first of 5 sections of the net. We do 2 sections this way, pulling in the slow, steady agony of draft horses, and then proceeding down a line that has no fish for our efforts. Uncle Wallace, who has finished his portion in the time it takes us to do less than half of ours, drives up and offers to get the rest. I'm exhausted from pulling, and Mom has never supported stubbornness when help is offered. I swallow my pride and nod. They jump on, and we drive to an easier net.
I came to commercial fishing in Alaska 32 years ago, the old way, by marriage, a way that younger women scorn as weak, following a man. I hear it in the narrow voices of 20-something women who have interviewed me. They make assumptions that leaving all you know and joining another life 5,000 miles away is dependent, believing that staying these decades through work obsession and profound isolation is weakness. I fished through the years as I could, in between 6 pregnancies and nursing 6 babies, between writing books and prepping to teach college classes, cooking massive meals, carrying water in buckets, washing clothes in an old wringer washer. I was afraid if I stepped out of fishing entirely, if I lost the kind of endurance and fearlessness required on the water, that I would never go back. I would get weak, and I would start getting old. My daughter's story is different. She was born into commercial salmon fishing. As a baby, on calm days, we would dress her in tiny rain gear and bring her out into the skiff, sitting upright in an aluminum laundry tub. I remember one night out in the water when she was 3. We found a herring in the net and handed it to her, a fish just her size. Her hands joyfully circled its small body. She held the herring the entire time we were out. Then near the end, as we motored to the delivery boat, the tender, she set it down in the bin with the salmon and petted him good nap. At the tender, as we sorted and tossed the salmon into the brailers, I turned beyond her eyes and slipped her herring, splashless, into the water. In just a few years, she will do this herself, I thought. She'll know instantly what to pull into the skiff, what has value, and what to throw back. By the time she was 9, she was fishing every day. At 12, she was full-time in the skiff. At 16, she ran her own skiff, training and running crewmen 5 to 10 years older than her. I know her story. I gave her a huge part of her story, but I don't know really what she thinks of it. We don't talk about this. I don't know how she tells it to others.
We fish from a set net site that perches on the edge of Shelikof Strait. In the summer, our islands are as green as jewels, snugly surrounded by the blue sea. It is the most beautiful place in the world. My grandfather came here to fish for salmon in the 60s, bringing his wife and 3 sons to a wilderness cabin on Bear Island. Its previous occupant had been an alcoholic who, as he descended into madness, swore that people were coming and cutting steaks off his cows as they grazed. My grandfather passed fishing on to my uncles and father, who taught me to take pride in my work on the sea, our strength as a family, our enduring legacy. I was told we were the biggest set netting operation in Alaska, that we worked on some of the roughest water for set netters, that our season was one of the longest. I believed all of these things because I could not imagine another family having the audacity to fish in waves so big you couldn't see over them to the other skiffs, wind so hard it whipped willowaws into our stiff backs as we kept working. I believed what I was told, and I've learned since that those facts are not the whole story.
We have 4 nets still to go now. We're on the Seal, a long net that extends 150 fathoms, 600 feet out into the bay. The nets are full of jellyfish and random kelp on this side of the island, too. As we begin the slow pull of jellyfish over the bow and occasional weeding of grass, we talk. We talk about life after college, applying for a Fulbright, living in South America. We talk about the books we're reading. I'm reading Uwan Akpan's Say You're One of Them. She's reading Kingsolver's The Poisonwood Bible. I tell her about the essay I'm working on. She describes a theater piece she's starting. We're soaked in ocean water, standing in an organic soup. Fish blood streaks our rain gear, bent over nets that never end. I can almost say I hate this work right now. But these words about words, these words with the one whose name means she speaks beautiful words. The skiff is brimming and buoyant with these words. I want more of them. Next year, Naphtali will have just graduated college. She won't need fishing money for tuition anymore. When she was 17, she stood before me in her rain gear, soberly pulling on her gloves before the afternoon pick. The summer had just begun. I can't face another season. She looked at me, numb. A stone fell into my pocket. I had no words to cheer her for the 3 months ahead. She knew what was coming, how every day would play out, but we needed her. She needed the money for college. She couldn't quit or leave. Every summer, I think, is her last. Naphtali motors the skiff now past the sway buoy and comes in for the landing. This is my part. I throw myself over the side and try to snag the cork line with my arm as we approach it, but she's going too fast and she doesn't come in close enough. I miss.
Mom's standing in the bow as I maneuver the skiff towards the shore sway. She's too busy planning our season to notice the upcoming cork line, and I have to tell her to pick it up before we miss it altogether. The first time we try to land, she misses it and looks back towards me with a slight frown. Slow down, Naphtali. I don't have 6-foot-long arms. Exactly, I think to myself as I reposition the skiff for a softer landing. That's why this project is a bad idea. As we pull up toward the lead line together, she is still talking about her idea of fishing and writing together. I don't want to dampen her enthusiasm, but I'm not convinced. What's in it for me? I ask. I understand the interest for you, returning to fishing after 20 years, but what do I write about? Fishing's all I've done. It's normal. I don't write about normal. She shoots me one of her looks. But writing gives you the chance to see things in a way you've never seen them. It gives you permission to take notice of what you ignore in your routine. I stare down at the muscled humpy writhing in my hand. I look at its perfect pattern of scales, the marbled blue and green of its head. I already see, I think mutinously.
She'll keep her place in the stern, and I'll stay in the bow most of the time. This means my daughter is my skipper. I am her crewman. I don't know if I can. I get sick in heaving seas. The work in the bow is the heaviest. My back, shoulder, and hips are getting testy. I am not what she wants. I am smaller than her, not larger, not a 21-year-old, but a 52-year-old, and not a guy, but a woman, and not just a woman, but her mother. Could anything be worse for her? I doubt it. But she has lived so much of her life in an aluminum boat. I've missed too much of it. It simply floated by. I can't get it back.
I was 17 the year I started driving full-time. Driving terrified me. I had been a bowman since I was 9, perfecting the art of leaning over the side of the skiff with my hip-booted feet vertical in the air, pressing my hip bones against the side to keep myself from falling into the water. I worked with my dad at first. Then my brother and I got our own skiff, and now, finally, I was alone and in charge, skipper of my own vessel, number 14. Growing up, I was petrified of failure, especially in fishing. Suddenly, there I was, standing at the stern of my own skiff, skipper, accountable for so much more than just grabbing the net and picking fish. Anything that went wrong was my fault. In the bow, I had freedom. I would dance around as we drove from net to net. I felt lithe and powerful as I threw Kelp out of the boat and lifted the sway buoy over the roller. Standing in the bow was quiet, away from the persistent grumble of the 60-horsepower motor. I got to lean my head close to the waves, knife in hand, and cut strands of bull kelp off the net while the skipper stood and waited. Now, trapped in the stern, I would be forced to watch new crewmen agonize with nets and lines and kelp, knowing I could do the job better. I would be responsible for keeping my bowman on task, making sure my skiff was keeping up with the others, landing on beaches without scraping my prop against a rock. Driving propelled me to the status of the crew members I had always idolized. Now there was no distinction between our respective work. I, like them, was expected to demonstrate a clear head in all situations. The autonomy scared me. When I screwed up, as I inevitably would, there would be no one with more experience to point to. My father's intensity in the skiff was legendary, and now it would be directed at me. I was a great bowman. I wanted to stay there.
Between nets, as we motor from one to the other, I bail, returning what isn't ours back to the ocean. I hold the rail tightly, but my arm is loose, my knees stay soft, my legs absorb the bucking motion of the boat. I scoop carefully as we go, releasing the water, jellyfish, and sludge in a controlled dump, taking note of the prevailing wind so we're not bathed any further in it. It's a constant exchange. We sieve from the water the salmon, fish eager and egg bent for their river, the river of their birth, to spill their seed and milt. So many thousands, the riverbeds are choked and the system is overspent. We collect them then, these extras we call ours, who would further overwhelm a tired ecosystem. And between our gatherings, we give back what we don't want and can't use. Sometimes the ocean takes from us as well. My husband and sons have nearly sunk their skiffs under crushing waves more times than I know. Naphtali, at 15, out in a 45-knot blow, was snatched from the skiff by the hand of a wave. She went under, then came up gasping, the ocean heaving her up again. My first years in the skiff, one of my jobs was to nurse the net as it uncoiled, sizzling, pulled into the ocean at full speed by the motor. If my boot caught, I would go overboard with it. I almost went over more than once. I dreamt of the ocean pulling me in and under, my own orange, rain-geared body uncoiling underwater, an ungraceful orange blossom. Later, we deliver our fish to the tender, mostly silent now in the near dark, the day's work declared done. The salmon we caught were mostly today's fish, not 30-year-old fish, I note. And all the conversation. I am filled to overflowing. It's possible to do this, I think. I look over at Naphtali, scrupulously cleaning her skiff. Her face still hasn't softened.
I'm not sure I want to do this next year. When she lifts up a line, I worry about her back. When she bails, I want to do it for her. She brings out the same protective instincts that I scorn from the men around me. She's impatient with my worry as well. I'm not used to being the strong one in the skiff, the last resort if a line won't snap neatly over the bow or the leads refuse to rise out of the water. Now, I cringe when she strains against a line while I maneuver with the motor, doing little to help her. I don't really want to do this. I wonder if this transition to watchful worry will only continue, if fishing is a foreshadowing of our relationship to come, and I don't want to think about it. Maybe that's why I'm reluctant to work with her on the water. I'm not ready to take care of my mother.
I wonder, what will be our harvest for a season together? I don't want all of it. I want the words. The net of words will weave around it all, our lives rejoined, stitched together. But I don't want the grasses, the jellyfish, the old memories, the kelp. I don't want the 8-foot seas in a storm, the missed lines, the blood, the arguments. If I could, I would throw some of this back. But it all comes together in a massive knot, like the nets themselves after a storm. When the threads wind into a foot-thick cord, we then must heave from the water and untangle mesh by mesh. I know now what I am hoping, that we are strong enough to haul it in, and that some of those times we are strong enough to let it go.